Hey everyone, and Happy New Year. Uh, I am here today with my December 2019 reading wrap up. I'm just go through the books that I read in the month of December. I'm going to start with my lowest rated and then go up to my highest rated books for the month. In December, I read 8 books. My lowest rated book this month was The Brave Learner by Julie Bogart. And this is, make sure I had the last name right. This book is a homeschooling book that had some very good intentions, I believe, but that just missed the mark entirely for me. I did appreciate her final section of the book. I think there were like 4 parts to it. Kind of talked about dysfunctions in the family and homeschooling and being honest about those sorts of things. And that was very good, but the rest of it was kind of just annoying to me. Kind of very privileged, meant for upper middle class, suburban and urban homeschooling white mothers. And it just hit wrong for me. There's a lot of like creating an art table and letting, I don't know how to describe my dislike for this book, but it just was one of those homeschooling books that just clearly wasn't for me. It might be great for someone who is a very different person from me, but it wasn't my sort of book. I gave that one 2 stars. My 3-star book was The Fairy Queen Book 1 by Edmund Spenser. This is one that my kids have been reading for our British literature, so I read it as well. And it is an epic poem, and it was written a long time ago. And one of the challenges in it is that there wasn't standardized spelling at the time of the writing, so sometimes it was hard to follow because of the kind of strange spellings. And also the word choice was a little more varied, and sometimes made up words or words that didn't really stay in the English language to this day would come up. So there were a lot of footnotes. And it was okay. It's not something I'd ever really bother reading again, but I'm not sad that I read it one time. My other 3-star to 4-star book, I think this one I'd probably give 3.5 stars overall, was The Golden Thread by Louis de Wohl. This is a novel about St. Ignatius of Loyola, and it was kind of fun to read. I was trying to get done with a bunch of books for a couple different challenges, so I put in tape flags to kind of keep myself on track. But I enjoyed the side story about the other characters maybe a little bit more than the story about St. Ignatius of Loyola. I don't know, it was just there was kind of a duo of characters that were a lot of fun that all sorts of crazy things happened to, and then they ended up, getting involved with Ignatius of Loyola. I have to admit, I enjoyed the other storyline better than the St. Ignatius storyline, and I feel like it took up more of the novel. Nothing earth-shattering, but it was fun to read. Um, Probably my least favorite of the 3 4-star books that I read was called The Darling Dahlias and the Poinsettia Puzzle by Susan Wittig Albert. This is a kind of mystery novel. It's in a series, The Darling Dahlias, and this is the only book I've read of that series. It's actually the only book that I've read by this author as well. Her writing style was a lot of fun. I really liked the setting. It was set in a small town in the South during the Depression, and the characters were all very fun. An interesting thing this author seems to do, from what I can tell, because a lot of these things would be kind of footnoted in the book I did read, like to learn more about Charlie Dickens and whatever, check out this novel. So I think kind of her thing that she does is she will wrap up one mystery in a novel, but there will be a couple other things alluded to that probably are going to be in future books. So the main mystery in this one, that I thought was going to be the main mystery at the beginning, really wasn't. It got semi-resolved at the end of the book, but not entirely resolved. So I imagine that storyline is going to come back in another novel. And then the thing that seemed to be just something randomly brought up from a past book was the one that actually got solved in this book. So it was unique. I enjoyed the Darling Dahlias were like a garden club of women. A couple of them were starting a bakery, and so that was a fun side story. And then there was this puzzle competition that they were in, and that was another kind of side story. So there were enough different things going on to keep you interested. Even though there were a couple of things that I didn't particularly love, what I thought was going to be the main mystery was semi-resolved, and I didn't really feel like it was the greatest of resolutions. And then there was this kind of love triangle thing that happened towards the end that I wasn't a fan of. But overall, it was a fun book to read. So it was kind of a cozy holiday mystery, and it was fun. Next up is another of the books I was trying to get through for a couple challenges, and that is Abandonment to Divine Providence by Jean-Pierre de Caussade. I also have a little The Classics Made Simple by Tan, the publisher Tan. This was actually really helpful. I might have to look into some more of these because it just gives kind of a brief overview of Father Caussade and his life and the things going on in the world at the time that he wrote the letters that eventually became this book. So it just gave me a lot more context that I would have had otherwise, which helped me a lot. But Abandonment to Divine Providence was a series of letters between Father Caussade and some sisters that he had been kind of their spiritual director or whatever, kind of talking about how to follow God's will and just understanding God's will in that if you abandon yourself to the will of God, then the things that happen in your life are what God has put in your life. So it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's my 30-second spiel on what this is. I would say a lot more complicated and a lot simpler than that. So I thought this was really good. I did go through and mark it up quite a bit, and I do plan to reread this at some point in time. And interesting, my husband started reading this before me, and he didn't finish it, and he had been marking in it, and sometimes I found that I would mark something that was completely polar opposite to what my husband had marked, and so that was kind of funny. Just two different people looking at the same work. Okay, my last 4-star book was Triumph, The Power and the Glory of the Catholic Church by H.W. Crocker III. It's a 2,000-year history, and boy, is this a 2,000-year history. This goes all the way from the very beginning of the church to like John Paul II. So not very long ago. It's a thick book. And I really enjoyed this in the sense that it gave me a lot more perspective of the church history over time, and that, you always think, or often you think that there wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on in the early church until the Reformation happened, but it just goes into all the different heresies that came up, which I knew there had been heresies and all sorts of things before the Protestant Reformation, but this just goes through the whole thing. And then, I don't know about this author, he has the funniest sense of humor, so I found myself laughing a lot during this very large history book, and like reading chunks or taking pictures of chunks to send to my husband so that he could laugh at them too. Like there's some king he was talking about, or prince or something, he says, as coprophiliacs are wont to do, and that just killed me. Absolutely killed me. So just the most random, just kind of like side notes that are just the funniest ways of phrasing things ever. So I really enjoyed this. It was really good. I don't have very many complaints. It was a fun read of the history of the church, so I guess there's not a whole lot more you can ask for when reading church history. And then I had 2 5-star books, and unfortunately, I don't have either one of these because they were both library books. So I continued on with my Wheel of Time and finished Lord of Chaos. This one was kind of slow for me. It took me a long time to get through the first part of it. And then we were visiting family for Christmas, and I may have read 600 pages while we were there trying to get it finished before I had to return it to the library. And so at first I was like, I don't know if this is going to be another 5-star book because it's just going so slow. And then the ending just blew me away. So it got another 5-star rating from me. I really enjoyed the fact that Perrin finally came back into the story. Of course, he came up in the prologue, like, okay, I'm off to find Rand or whatever. And then he didn't make it back into the story until page 792. So, come on. But he had a really great role there at the end. So I was happy with that. So I'm going to be continuing on with my Wheel of Time reading in 2020. And my favorite book in the month of December was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is one I read towards the beginning of the month, and I read it kind of as a buddy read type thing. I read it with the group that Olive started to read this book because there was this weird controversy having to do with YA authors in some random school in some tiny town. Anyway, but basically Olive wanted to read this because this was the book that the person was fighting for, who somehow managed to tick off a whole bunch of YA authors. But this is the story of a man on death row. The author is the lawyer who was helping death row inmates with appeals and so forth. He was starting a foundation, a legal practice, like a nonprofit, to help people on death row to appeal their death sentences, essentially. And so he does talk about a variety of different cases and a variety of executions, and it was so hard to read some of those executions. But the main focus is on this one particular death row client who was clearly innocent, to the point that, like, they basically had no evidence against him. They just had a few made up evidences and so forth just to get this poor guy convicted. And he was on death row. Like, they sent him to death row before he was even tried, which is not something that is done. But basically the whole process of getting his sentence overturned, and it took a long time and a lot of effort. So it's a heart-wrenching book. It was easy to read in terms of it was so well written and so compelling, but it was hard to read in terms of the subject matter. And there's a movie out based on this book now. I don't know if I will ever be brave enough to see that movie. I just don't know if I could handle it, but I highly, highly, highly recommend that book. Probably one of my top books of 2019 that I read. So those are all the books that I read in the month of December. Feel free to click subscribe if you'd like to see more of my videos, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.